using big data now, they are monitoring the health of, say, Peking University, or a province in China, or an ethnic group, or a generation of people. There are just too many Chinese for anybody to monitor individually. But they get a shape of what is healthy and what is not. In the feudal past, the problem of Chinese society is it is big, so it has to be layered, and problems below never get surfaced. So, 报公, righteous emperors who send inspectors down, holding local officials to account. Many of us would have seen Zhang Yimou's 纠局, 打官司, a problem on the ground, people try to cover up. They'll be nice to you, give you compensation. You insist on resolution. You go upwards. By that time, they already informed their friends one level above to contain it. If you persist, they become harder. If you try too hard, something may happen to your relatives. But now with big data, you're at an intermediate level. You don't know what's happening below. Your bosses may know, and you'll be held into account. They're experimenting. They don't quite know what will work. But they know that if democracy, the deep ideal of democracy, which is, to paraphrase Abe Lincoln in Gettysburg speech, government of the people, by the people, for the people, which inspired Sun Zhongshan to coin 三民主义, 民族, 民权, 民生. In other words, how do you ensure that the objective of governance is not to enrich or favor a particular class or tribe, but for the whole population? One man, one vote. Whether it's done Swiss style, American style, or Westminster style, is only a means to an end. And we know that one man, one vote in many mature democracies is creating a huge problem because politicians are always worried about the next election, which is always around the corner, which means that their compass of analysis and action narrows, not because they are stupid, but because they've got to be voted in first. It's not that in the mature economies the problems are not known. It is simply that politically many of these problems cannot be tackled if you want to stay in power. And the Chinese are now developing a system where perhaps it can be done. And between China and the mature economies, where the mass of humanity is, in Asia, in Africa, Latin America, people are questioning, with the technology we now have, what is the best way to govern on behalf of the whole population? The old, the young, the crippled, the disadvantaged, those who are very gifted, those who are not so gifted. There is a fear now in the US that China, when it grows, will become a big problem to the West. And you can see it. And for those Westerners who visit China often, they worry. Last July, Rand Corporation published a report called War with China, Thinking Through the Unthinkable. I read the report, clinical. Not talking about nuclear exchange and Armageddon. What happens if there's a war today? What happens if there's a war 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And a concern with China's policy of what they call area denial anti-access. Area denial, anti-access. It was a term which I wasn't familiar with when I was in the armed forces. The US moves 11 battle groups around 11 aircraft carriers. Each aircraft carrier with enormous firepower, which can easily destroy a medium-sized country. 5,000 sailors, a mothership with submarines, air surveillance, a whole assembly around it. It's how the US project power around the world, following the old strategy of Admiral Mahan. The Chinese have developed an aircraft carrier killer missile. And they conduct exercises where they attack an aircraft carrier from different altitudes and directions, maybe 20 missiles coming simultaneously. An aircraft carrier has layered defenses. And the final line of defense was what in the Second World War was used against kamikaze aeroplanes, which is just a wall of lead. You just fire off enough lead so that nothing penetrates it. Maotun, you have a shield, you have a spear. Your spear can pierce through any shield, my shield can defend itself against any spear. Well, this is a military game. Pacific Command, based in Honolulu, their job is to worry about China. When Admiral Harry Harris, about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, he visited Australia, gave a talk at the Lowy Institute. He said nothing will change after January the 20th, which kind of surprised me because how can he commit a future US president? He said, we will work with China where we can, we will confront China where we must. And from the birth of a republic in the 18th century, we have been prepared to fight for the freedom of navigation. And we are prepared to fight tonight. A few days later, a US underwater drone was scooped out of the water off Subic. We don't know what happened. We don't even know whether it was a signal. But it was certainly not a random act. Between the US military and the Chinese military, there are rules of engagement. Ships, land, submarines. I think they're probably developing rules of engagement for underwater drones. The issue of the South China Sea is not freedom of navigation. The issue of the South China Sea is submarines. China's submarine base is in Sanya, deep below, like in some James Bond movie, the submarines swoosh out. They carry nuclear missiles. The US has a much bigger arsenal than China. And in the first strike, the US will probably destroy most of China's nuclear capabilities. But if China has a few, well, I can't say, because China's missiles are also on railway tracks, and you may not be able to catch all of them. What the Chinese need to do is not to deliver equal destruction on the US, but enough so that a few cities are taken, and that will cause the US to pause. Now, I was in the military for many years, so the profession on both sides requires its leaders to think through dark scenarios. In the RAND study, it said, if there's a war today, the US will be blooded, but China will be pulverized. In a war 10 years from now, the US will also be blooded. There must be strategic thinkers who say, look, therefore it's better to fight now. Better not to wait. And the Chinese know that. But they are saying, look, must we be in this Thucydidean trap where big power relations a zero-sum game. And they say, no, yes, we could prepare for the worst, but let's work on what they call 新型大国关系, a new pattern of big power relations. The US fears that China will behave like itself when it becomes the biggest economy on earth. That's a US fear, and therefore it's an inevitable clash, the way there was an inevitable clash between the US and the Soviet Union. Because both claim the total human being, his values, his philosophy. But China is not like that. China is over 90% Han. This is not an accident. China is 90% Han, not because it's not able to incorporate many more non-Han people into its realm. It's because it doesn't want to. It doesn't want to because the Chinese people have an intricate culture of relationships. And so long as you are Chinese, Li, relationships. For a long time, Chinese dynasties had no foreign ministry. They only had a Li Bu, a ministry for rituals. Truly, you establish